16th of May 2023. We got lots and lots of news to get through here tonight. It takes me a minute to get up to that. It's the 16th. My apologies. The hell was that, Dana? That was just Dana. Yeah, it's a 5-man show, and you got one man running it, and so sometimes that's how it plays out. Once we get into the news, everything kind of works. Most times, anyway. Hope everybody had a great day, if that's possible, on planet Nutty. Probably one of the most important facets of nuclear is 55 countries banned the food from 14 prefectures in Japan for a decade. It's unprecedented. We've never had nothing like that in history, ever. Gas, coal, oil plants breaking down. You don't ban the food from half the country. Should be banned for life, but they put people in key positions and lifted the restrictions. They claim they're in a building over there that is actually doesn't even exist anymore. So what are you supposed to do with something like this? They use dirty bombs for their A-10 Warthogs. You know, how many suicide bombers does it take to equal an aircraft carrier? It's a question you should ask yourself. You had media worldwide pretending they're in reactor 4 at Japan that had melted down. It doesn't exist anymore, so nothing makes sense anymore. How can you trust the media when this contempt they have for you? And them, there's 4,000 or 5,000 very wealthy, influential business owners, so-called celebrities, superstars, etc., industries. And the other 8 billion people on the planet can get sick and die. They couldn't care less. In fact, that's what they're hoping for. And they don't know why. They have everything money can buy, and now they're just full of hate contempt for everybody. It never filled their souls. They weren't content. So worldwide media for 80 years has been telling you nuclear is like eating a banana, walking in sunshine, flying on an airplane. Those things and many like it have nothing to do with nuclear fallout. So this is our second story we'll get to right away, is what appears to be a nuclear detonation. We got a controversial poll, I'm sure, tonight. Where's that to? So we got a poll. Did Russia use a nuclear weapon during NATO's proxy war in Ukraine? Ukraine is not at war, NATO is. Or could it be staged a false flag? Did NATO do it themselves and blame it on Russia? Is that what's going on here? Did Russia use a nuclear weapon? So Britain had shipped down a lot of depleted uranium munitions. And they're saying that a drone strike blew up several of their munition facilities, storage facilities from NATO that is supplying the weapons. Britain's part of NATO. And this video has been circulating for about a couple of days. And I kind of ignored it because there's a lot of videos like that over the last year, right? And I watched it. And I was like, holy shit, what's going on? What am I looking at? That looks just like a nuclear explosion to me. And there's 2 of them in that video. So when we get to the video, we'll show you that. That's the Britain's Prime Minister. And there's one of Disney's princes. or prince rather, I should say. Disney, Walt Disney. Nareem, I think, is that prince. And I was like, because that's when I seen him, I was saying that's like a Walt Disney prince. And sure enough, because I not that I've ever watched it or something like that, it's just that you can't escape this kind of propaganda, right? So I remembered it, I looked it up, and sure enough, when I put the pictures together, I thought it was a little scary. A huge mushroom blast reignites, like it was already on fire or what? A depleted uranium reignites the claims rather, from depleted uranium. So there's a lot of propaganda to downplay depleted uranium, which was supposed to be called DOLRAM, depleted uranium low-level radioactive material. They got rid of the latter part of the acronym, and nobody knows why. They stopped calling it DOLRAM and started calling it DU. But it's not going to be depleted for a couple of billion years because the stuff that's in it has gone through a chain reaction. That's what makes it so hard. So because it's gone through a chain reaction, that means it has anthropogenic man-made properties that are not normal. Okay, so we're going to get this as the second story we'll get to. The first story, and now what you can see in that picture right there in the background, you see the start of the next explosion. So there was 2 explosions caught in this one video. We're going to play the video when we start the next, because we got to kind of, well, there's a bunch of stuff we got to read first to get after it. Chernobyl radiation damage not passed to children. So this kind of works for the story that we're about to cover because it's in Ukraine, right? Chernobyl was in Ukraine. BBC happens to be Britain. Britain had supplied Ukraine with the depleted uranium munitions. But my take on it is it's a small nuclear bomb that they set off. And I'll show you the documentation for my assertions coming up in a little tiny bit. Chernobyl radiation damage not passed to children. Now, we've covered this. Danny, you already covered it, and you covered it a lot when it happened, that story. There's a lot of media came out with their own versions of this story. But a lot of them regurgitated the author that I'm going to show you. Chernobyl radiation damage not passed to children. So first I'm just going to run you through 7 studies on Chernobyl so you kind of build a picture in your eyes. These are all pertaining to Britain, 3,000 kilometers away after Chernobyl. 1986, thyroid radiation doses in Britain are rising from Chernobyl accident. So people were being affected, obviously. Variabilities of Chernobyl cesium retention in the water column of lakes in the English Lake District 2 and 4 years after disposition. Now, that's 1993, by the way, I might add, because it happened in 86. So the time of water in the English lakes 2 and 4 years after the disposition is radioactive fallout. Aspects of environmental monitoring by the British Nuclear Fuel Government Agency following the Chernobyl reactor accident, which in a lot of people's opinion that are in the know will tell you Britain fixated on this only because they were having bad releases from their fuel reprocessing facilities and other issues where they had a meltdown in 1957, right? So this was a way of lumping everything on, never waste a crisis moment. Aspects of environmental monitoring by the British Nuclear Fuel, which is the big government corporation. Changes in thyroid cancer in Scotland. Factors contributing to radiocesium variability, upland sheep flocks in West Columbia, which is right alongside of a a meltdown that's been going on since 1957, and an endless reprocessing, even for other countries, where they bring fuel to Sellafield, which is right alongside of. Now, they had cancer clusters before it is in Crumbia, which is right alongside of Sellafield fuel processing site, which is a massive nuclear wasteland. There's buildings there they can't go into, right? There's fuel pools there they've never seen, it's been 50 years since anybody has acknowledged what happened, right? The people that used to work there probably all died by now. They don't know what's in it. It's too lethal to get into. Studies of iodine, cesium in milk, meat, vegetables, northeast Scotland following Chernobyl. So this will make sense in a minute. Geographical analyst of thyroid cancers in young people from northern England of a sustained excess in females in Cumbria. Females are 4 times more vulnerable than males to anthropogenic man-made radiation of all species, not just humans. So let's go look at another direction. So years later, it turns out there was actually 9,400 farms in Ireland and in Scotland, the United Kingdom, that were closed because of radioactive fallout from Chernobyl's 30-mile exclusion zone that extended out, obviously, to 3,000 miles. So if you go and listen to the experts, they're going to tell you that's a 30-mile exclusion zone. Outside that is not bad. Yeah, but they closed 9,000 farms. 400 are still closed today. The rest should have never been open. The radiation doesn't just go around looking for farmland. You had to contaminate the entire water of the country. It's impossible not to, right? Okay. So Chernobyl radiation damage not passed to children. Professor Jerry Thomas. She's an actual professor, as most of these crazies are. And we know her as a wanted.
So, for example, coming here, I would have got a dose of 0.07 millisieverts on the flight.
She's in Japan.
And I actually went round Fukushima Daiichi on Wednesday, and the dose that I had going around the site, so very close to where the reactors are, it was 0.01 and probably lower, but that's the lowest it could actually read. So I got more of a dose flying here, and we'll get a dose tomorrow when I fly home, than I would have done from being in Fukushima.
You couldn't get into the control room at Fukushima for 7 years. She walked around reactor 3, she claims. She's the author of the study. I would imagine in the future there will be thousands of documentaries on serial mass murderer Professor Jerry Thomas, mass serial killer. BBC is just a propaganda machine. There's actually no journalism there. Children of Chernobyl and the volunteers who still care, they're British charities will go down and buy the children radios because they don't have or blankets or get them heart surgery and stuff like this because Russia's not going to do it, right? So she says Chernobyl wasn't passed on to kids, but you got all these British charity has to go down because it was passed on to the kids. There's no irony in that at all, right? They show you this picture. It's the first to demonstrate, the very first, to demonstrate the DNA damage caused by radiation not passed on to future children. Because the rest of them says it does, basically. There's no additional DNA damage in children. Of course, DNA is not the only thing to be damaged. There's 1,800 diseases, not just cancer, by the way, or congenital malformations. In children born to parents who were exposed to radiation from the Chernobyl explosion before they were conceived. It was only 3% of the children born after Chernobyl that were healthy. The other 97% weren't. There was over 3 million children with disabilities because of Chernobyl, by the way. So some of these pictures I might show you, you might think are harsh, but that is nuclear fallout. And if you don't see the picture, how can you understand the big picture? So children of Chernobyl, if you go out and Google it, you'll find an absurd amount of charities looking for donations, for instance. So the children, this what you're seeing there is where they brought children from Chernobyl to the United Kingdom. That Professor Jerry Thomas from the Imperial College of London, I should say the Imperial College of London, using Jerry Thomas to claim that they don't exist. Right? Just like Reactor 4 I showed you a few moments ago, where they claim they're in a building that don't exist, where the media revels in deceiving you, manipulating you, where, we'll get to that in a moment, where I'll show you documentation, study after study after study. I know that don't mean nothing. It only means something if I'm in $1 million suit. And almost 9,000 farms, it was actually 9,400 farms were closed because of radioactive fallout from Chernobyl, very far away. So when you're closing 9,400 farms, you're acknowledging brutal contamination. Just brutal. So you're going to have an incredible amount of diseases and illnesses in Britain, let alone in United Kingdom. So we know. I just want you to appreciate the gravity or the disconnect that these people. They only care. There's 4,000 or 5,000 of them worldwide. Basically, these are in positions of decisions, and they make their decisions based on this so-called agenda. And a lot of it's got to do with United Nations, of course, which is not supposed to exist and has orchestrated the majority of it, but not all of it. She's Professor Thomas, Jerry Thomas from the Imperial College of London, explained, so there's no demon tumor that came out of Chernobyl that we won't be able to treat. We won't be able to treat. Well, you better get busy because you're 37 years behind so far. How are you going to treat those kids, Dr. Jerry Thomas, is the question. Down syndrome in regions of Scotland and everywhere else because of Chernobyl. Schizophrenia after Chernobyl and everywhere else. Professor Thomas should go down there and stand behind those kids. The dean of the Imperial College of London should stand there and say, Professor Jerry Thomas is 100% right. The intellectual, developmental, and behavioral disorders in children from Belarus exposed uterus following the Chernobyl accident. And I can show you endless pictures. I'm not going to. I'm just going to run you through fast, because this is a hard story. If you go look up my Chernobyl presentations, look up my the Chernobyl Netflix didn't tell you about video. And that wasn't live, that was posted. So it's under videos, not live, because YouTube got everything split up, right? Alphabet. Radiocesium on the urban surfaces in West Colombia 5 months after Chernobyl. Do you think it's going to go away? Contamination of food in Czechoslovakia by cesium isotopes. Do you think they're really not going to have any adverse side effects from that? Cesium-137 in perch in the Swedish lakes after Chernobyl. They closed the freshwater commercial fishery for 30 years after Chernobyl. So when you got BBC putting creatures from Imperial College of London like Professor Jerry Thomas on a pedestal and telling you a blatant lie, whatever BBC tells you, you better be worried about. The minute they tell you that it's okay, you need to get busy and educate yourself, because you will find the opposite. Radioactivity in breast milk after Chernobyl. Why are they doing studies like that if it's harmless? Chernobyl fallout in Finland, hot areas, hot zones, lethal zones. Disposition of fallout in the northeast Italy. Disposition of water systems of the French lakes, the Alps, derived from Chernobyl accident. Strontiums, cesium, plutoniums, americiums, distribution in the French wetlands after Chernobyl. Radioactivity levels in soil and crops, your food after Chernobyl in Italy, southern Italy. Concentrations of iodine, now which is a tracer, it means all the other isotopes are going to be there, in the urine of Japanese adults and children following Chernobyl. So does this look like a 30-kilometer exclusion zone to anybody? Am I just blowing it out of proportion? Measuring the radiation exposures of Norwegian reindeer under field conditions. Look at all the people in that study. Vertical distribution inventories of cesium in the Syrian soil, in the Mediterranean. Hot particles in Finland. Radioactive pollution and the dynamites of infectious diseases in wildlife, and birds and animals, etc., in your forest. Because there's 1,800 diseases, not just cancer, like you've been led to believe. Pediatric thyroid, and it's not just thyroid. And thyroid, of course, means it's saturated. And you can see thyroid cancers, it means they've been producing a massive amount of radioactive hormones also. And that's what you're going to see everywhere there's a nuclear accident. Because it'll get in everything else at the same time, but your thyroid means now it's radioactive hormones, which is whole shit stuff. And for insects and birds, it's catastrophic stuff. And if you watch my last video, you'll understand that if you're not familiar with this subject. Exposed to fallout from the Chernobyl explosion. Like Professor Geraldine Thomas in the Imperial College of London should be disbanded for pretending that don't exist. How is that acceptable? What about, at what point do we start thinking about all the species and the humans? We're all entitled to live, aren't we? According to them, we're not. According to them, we have no right to have a conversation, no right to have a brain, have no right. Our right is to be slaves if they deem us so. And these people are always changing, right? There's a complete disconnect. They're better than you. They're gods. They actually feel like gods. They act like gods too. Radiation contamination after Chernobyl, the effects of the doses received by the population. The entire population was radiated in Croatia. In Greece, cesium levels in human muscles. Jerry Thomas is not going to argue any of these away. He's not able to. And I shouldn't even use the word Jerry Thomas. Her catalyst is the Imperial College of London. That's who's doing it. She's merely the megaphone. But a despicable one because she revels in it. Economic viability of short rotation crops for energy production for reuse of cesium-contaminated land in Belarus. So using crops that are radioactive means they're full of radioactive particles. And so when you burn them, you liberate them into the environment. This should have been done is stored for a million years, but not released into the environment. But this is what they seem to do everywhere worldwide where there's nuclear. And we can't have a future with that attitude, with that ideology, with that complacency. Plutonium isotopes in the surface area of Prague after Chernobyl. And illegal abortions, congenital abnormalities in Hungary, despite the fact that Jerry Thomas in the Imperial College of London and many, many others out there in April of 2021 claimed there was no adverse side effects from Chernobyl in generations, when there's nothing but. There's 1,800 diseases. It's not just... There's 80 years of talking about thyroids and cancer. Well, we don't see cancers, so increase in cancer, therefore. But nuclear is cancer. The best way to stop cancer is get rid of nuclear power. That's the reality. And away we go. Huge mushroom blast reignites depleted uranium claims. Now, the media has worked diligently since Britain announced they were shipping depleted uranium munitions to Ukraine and the weapons to shoot them, to release them. They're dirty bombs. They meet all the attributes of a dirty bombs. So the claim is that a depleted uranium storage facility was hit, and reports that radiation levels were rising in the aftermath of the strike. Now, we know how this industry works. You know, they were showing you the tsunami picture and telling you it was the radioactive ocean when it was a tsunami, and then come here and call you an idiot a few weeks later when you bought into it. Because you turn to the experts for advice and then they stab you in the back. And this is their routine. This well thought out long before Fukushima happened. It's like Monticello allegedly leaked 10,000 barrels of radioactive water. They call it tritium, but there's no hoses on the nuclear site that carries tritium water. And they had to shut down the facility to fix it, which meant it was a high pressure, which meant it was the containment, which meant it was absurd radiation. So 4 months later, they announced that it happened, and then they said, going to check the water. But it happened 4 months ago. How are you going to check the water when it happened 4 months ago? It was a well thought out propaganda, and then it went dark and went silent. And this is everywhere worldwide. Anything happens, this is how they play it out. They'll call it a leak. They'll say it's under control. They'll say nothing got off the site. They all got the same playbook from the International Atomic Energy Agency. And now they have jeopardized all species and the future of humanity. It's time to gut up. A viral video of a huge explosion at a city, and I'm not going to butcher a Ukrainian name because I don't speak Ukrainian, in western Ukraine has been shared widely along with the unverified claims that a depleted uranium storage facility was hit, and reports that radiation levels were rising in the aftermath of the strike. Striking images of a huge explosion. I've never seen nothing like it outside of nuclear. Recorded near the city's added fuel to the social media speculation, resurrected existing narratives about the so-called depleted uranium shells. So the theory is that they blew up a storage facility with around 60 million pounds of DOLRAM, depleted uranium low-level radioactive material munitions, which each and every one of them meets the same attributes as a dirty bomb, contaminated with technetium-99, the uranium, the plutonium, americium, and everything else. You can't filter the radiation out of solid objects as a solid fuel. So this is stuff they didn't use, but went through a chain reaction. So there's no way. It's like saying water is only tritium. You can't filter out the rest of it either. Shells. And then they show you these small shells, which is really important, by the way. These are 25 millimeter rounds of depleted uranium munitions from Baghdad in 2004. These pictures, by the way. But that's the same theory, right? According to the information, the value of the ammunition destroyed is $500,000, because DU is pretty cheap. $500,000. They got small missiles that are $1 million each. Okay. So first I'll take you through the screenshots, then we'll play the video. So this is the first explosion. And it rises up. I'm going to play the video in a minute. That's a pretty good, let me go back one. So you can see at this height, it's still incinerating the ear. It's burning the ear is what it's burning, right? And still burning it. The black on the outside is the unburnt. This is 100%. Let me jump to that other screen here. So I can zoom in a bit. And I might bear with me. Now that's the second explosion in the background. That's the second explosion in the background. So it's quite a ways away from the first explosion, right? Now this is a bang. This is like a stick of dynamite going off. And that's not how weapons blow up. And look how perfectly symmetrical the building is. And because the buildings that are blowing up are structures, you should see large pieces of the structure flying. Right, we're not seeing large pieces of the structure flying. The only time you see that is when there's, because this is not like they got munitions stored outdoors or whatever, like they do after Iraq, right? Where they were, my apologies. Okay, let me get back to that, and then we're going to play the video. So one of the things I was looking for was parts of the building to be tossed far distances, right? Look how beautiful that first one is. Now the second one is blown in the background. That's the second one in the background. So you get context. So there was another rumor. There's a big stockpile of depleted uranium munition in the warehouses that blew up. Nuclear weapons related speculation, which is what I'm doing. And if the NATO arms depots, the NATO, which is 28 militaries, that Russia's blown up contained depleted uranium munitions is supplied by the United Kingdom, those areas of Ukraine may become hotbeds for lung cancer and birth defects, heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, in the future, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. There's around 1,800 diseases. And so if you have a nuclear event going off, you don't get out of the hot zone and start breathing it in, that's really bad. You're going to have huge issues for the rest of your life. But if you stay there on top of that and don't get out, like they done to Japan, for instance, and they done, doing a certain amount in Chernobyl, certainly, and certainly in Santa Susana. Other accounts on Twitter, Telegram posted charts purpose of rising radiation levels are observed in the hours after, or was amplified by multiple reports from Russia's media outlet. So people we're checking for radiation, we're finding it. Radioactive panic, a catch of British depleted uranium tanks shells destroyed. So British depleted uranium tank shells, we're talking, now you're talking 155 millimeter shells, right? But I'm going to play the video here now. We got one more to read there, and then we'll play the video. Suggest instead, there was another one that suggested instead this was a Soviet era ammunition dump, which the report indicate could have contained as much as 30,000 tons of ammunition, which would be 60 million pounds. Okay, so, but we can't get any confirmation of what's going on. But the consensus seems to be that it was the British munitions that blew up. But the problem I have with it is because not all the munition is going to detonate at the one time, right? There's going to be multiple, like a bunch of fireworks where there's different types going off. But this explosion doesn't look like it came from munitions to me. It looks like it came, I'll play it for you right now. To me, there's two nuclear explosions from small nuclear weapons. Now, I could be wrong, right? I'm not saying I'm right, but that's my educated guess. So this is really looking like a nuclear explosion, no matter how you, especially as it starts to cool down, which is typical. Now, look at the second one. That's a nuclear explosion, see? That's a criticality. That's not multiple munitions going off. And even if it was a Soviet era, it wouldn't detonate like that. Okay, I'm going to flip back and zoom in on that one, because that's a pretty good shot. Then we'll play the video again. That's an amazing death plume right there, if that's nuclear. But that's exactly 100% what a nuclear detonation would look like. That's it. That's a pretty neat trick if it's not. Let's look at it one more time before we get into the next story of the night. So that's the original detonation. There's two of them. Wow. So when they zoom out with their camera, well, that'll show up in a few seconds. That's a small nuclear weapon. You got Russia's at war with 28 countries. That's a proxy war. So what is Russia going to do? How is Russia going to fight 28 countries? Oh, well, they're a nuclear weapon. They're feeling the pressure to use the nuclear weapon to make sure they got... remember the controversies over the original story that we covered multiple times as the story started showing up right from the get-go. Britain was going to supply dirty bombs, a.k.a. dual-ram depleted uranium munitions. They're also confirming there's the tank rounds, which are big, they're big rounds. But the detonation doesn't add up. But it's a detonation. That was a nuclear weapon, a small nuclear bomb, most likely. My opinion only. I don't know about how other people might feel it. I notice whenever you're talking about a subject like this. But because I've been at this quite a lot, briefcase nuke, small nuclear weapon. They can't make small nuclear reactors, but they have no problem making briefcase nukes, small nuclear bombs. And they actually have cannons that fire nuclear weapons from the 60s or 50s even. Powerful Cyclone Mocha poised. This was the day before devastating strike in Myanmar. I've seen winds of over 170. And so what was that gusting? I wonder, 230? Sustained on land? They moved 6 million people into shelters. And we've only seen these types of storms striking land constantly since Fukushima. This is the new norm since Fukushima. Because you got all this radiation pulse covering the planet. You got 80 years of emission already out there, pulsing energy every second, invisible snowstorms of it. And then all of a sudden you got a pulse covering the whole planet, sustained, hemorrhaging, continuously coming out, adding to it, and it never goes away. And it pulses energy at the speed of light every second. And so basically drying up our planet in increments by destroying the ecosystem. So the ecosystem doesn't function. For instance, the bacteria and the fungus in the woods is being eradicated, as we've seen at Chernobyl pre-Fukushima studies. And then the forest can no longer suck up water, and the litter and the foliage can't break down. So you have vicious forest fires when lightning strikes. So there's a huge hurricane on top of that. And we're seeing them over the last couple of years, like 900 miles wide hurricanes in F4 categories. Just unheard of pre-Fukushima. The hurricanes and the typhoons and the cyclones that we're having now was called, those types of numbers and stories were fictional stories we would listen to about Mars. Mars has 200 plus mile per hour winds, 250 mile per hour winds pretty regularly and blah, blah, blah. But you never heard tell of that on Earth, right? Now you have storm after storm after storm after storm. And another single is the rapidly intensified, because Fukushima killed the oceans, and the oceans are not working the way they would normally, because the phytoplankton, which is the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestration chain, intensified into a powerful category 4. Then it went to a category 5. Now the category 4 was 150 miles per hour wind, but 155 is a category 5. So when you're talking about millions of people in harm's way, it's prudent to call it a category 5, because it's the same thing when it comes to the human carcass getting hit by these projectiles from winds at that speed. And then you got to add on the gusting to those winds, right? 150 mile per hour wind is going to gust way past the 155, which is considered a category 5. And we see them time in, time out refuse to do it, because now it's officially on the world record, and you have all these category 5s all of a sudden. So you have lots of category 4s that should have been category 5. And then that'll change your whole outlook on, because you see this post-2011. And you say, well, after Fukushima, weather went crazy. So they're withholding classifications so it doesn't, they can't quite stop it. But I mean, the discrepancy of 5 miles per hour, when you're talking about millions and millions and millions of people, you're supposed to warn them. That's what the idea of these categories are, to warn you. So when you're hitting 150, it's impossible not to call it a category 5. It's criminal, really, not to call it a category 5. just shy of a Category 5 intensity, which is 155. Anywhere along and to the south of where its eyes crosses the coast could see a storm surge of at least 10 feet above typical tide levels. So you're talking about storm surges 10 feet above high tide line. And the people are not going to get warned properly because you refuse to call it a Category 5 because you don't want that on the records. But a 10-foot storm surge is lethal. Try walking across a 10-foot raging river and tell me it's not. Opposition leader says Japan should use Fukushima water for drinking if it's so safe. I wish I could get the ear of some of these people. Because, first off, South Korea is crazy. The nuclear industry is crazy down there. They control most of the country. Uh-oh, another water. A little thirsty. Opposition leader says Japan should use Fukushima water for drinking if it's safe. Which I why not? That's what they're saying. It's so safe you can drink it. Well, make the World Health Organization and United Nations drink all of it. Saying it's safe enough to drink, the country should do it. Just talk about it. The main opposition Democratic Party expressed opposition to the inspection visit, raising questions about whether the team conduct a thorough inspection and claiming that the trip could end up endorsing Japan's plan. So, because South Korea went a couple of weeks ago, we covered a couple of days in a row, where high-ranking government, elected government officials went to Japan, went to Fukushima nuclear meltdown site, and were rejected by the government, by TEPCO, by the Fukushima plant itself, into the evacuated communities. Nobody would talk to them. Now Japan, you're being silly. Come on down. We'll take care of you. And they'll send you back a clone of whoever goes there, and they'll say, oh, it's great. The peaches are wonderful. Boris Johnson dropped by with some peach juice. Yeah, you don't trust Japan. Japan won't let anybody independently check the tanks because they're empty. Tanks were built to manipulate you into thinking nothing went into the ocean. If you put it in the tank, after all the earthquakes they had there, you wouldn't be able to get back on the site. You're talking about 2.2 sieverts per liter. These are lethal doses by the gallon just walking past it. If it's safe enough to drink, they should start drinking it and shut up. Should at least be used as agricultural or industrial water, he said. Because he doesn't know the whole picture, right? He doesn't know that they never stopped dumping it into the ocean. They can't filter it. The Siri system for the cesium didn't work. The Riva system for the water filtration by France didn't work. We covered this. We got playlists full of it. The ELP system in 2014 still wasn't working. You're talking about, you're pouring it over the reactor cores, so it's lethal doses by the liter. If you suck it up, you can't walk over the hoses or the pipes unless they're 4 feet thick lead. And actually, I don't even know if 4 feet thick lead will shield you from the kind of materials we're talking about. IAEA says public trust is key to projects using radioactive soil from Fukushima. So this was the Japan Times. Always monsters. So the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a subsidy of the United Nations, which is a corporation, has no sovereignty over any country, let alone Japan. There are 195 militaries that shouldn't exist, that come from what's known as League of Nations, pre-Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After that, they changed their name to United Nations, United, which is pretty fancy, right? It's a nice fancy name, United Nations. They're united in misery, united in destruction, united in stupid, united in degenerates. You got to be a pretty incredible degenerate to be a player in the rankings of that death cult that is United Nations. Did Russia use a nuclear weapon during NATO's proxy war in Ukraine? You got 28 countries, big countries, a lot of them are nuclear countries, supplying Ukraine with technology, soldiers, hands-on technicians to keep everything working, and the weapons. And so I expect nothing less than, or did they blow it up themselves with a nuke so they can blame it on Russia in the next couple of weeks somewhere? Because the story, we don't even know today, right? This is 3 days later. We still don't know what's going on there. But normally they're all over the place telling you, oh, they done this, and they blew up the neighborhood, and now we got all kinds of conjectures, opinions. IAEA says public trust is key to projects using radioactive soil from Fukushima. IAEA says public trust is the key to projects using radioactive soil. That's not what they actually said, by the way, and we'll get to that in a minute. So they emit to 30 million one-ton bags. Now they only emit to 14 million one-ton bags. Pretty convenient to get rid of 16 million one-ton bags. You're talking a lot. You're talking about if you put 1 ton in the back of a 1-ton pickup truck that's 20 feet long and go bumper to bumper. That's with 30 million of these 1-ton bags. That's 5 rows of traffic right around the planet. It's a lot of soil. The radiation is not going to go away for millions of years, so how is it now somehow magically safe to be used somewhere? Because it's not. It can't be. Why are you doing this? Why not store it? Why be this stupid? This is stupid. We're talking about the industry refuses to put the genie back into the bottle a single time. The success of Japan's plan to recycle some of the radioactive soil, recycle it. Why would you even consider it? Being stored in Fukushima in the wake of the nuclear meltdowns hinges on earning the trust of all parties involved. Officials of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which doesn't have any sovereignty over any country, said in Tokyo Friday after wrapping up an on-site review. As if they're the arbiters. The 9-member delegation comprising International Atomic Energy Agency's officials and other international experts from the United States, Britain, Belgium, were visiting Japan this week to review Japan's plan to reduce the volume of contaminated soil and recycle some of it. To reduce the volume of the contaminated soil and recycle it, some of it. Well, how can you reduce it if you're not going to recycle it? What are you talking about? The soil is currently being stored in Fukushima, which is 2 kilometers away from the ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns, not all of it, but some of it, and is transferred out of the prefecture by 2045, is mandated by Japanese law. So, which is really, like, what are you talking about? You got to get it out of the Fukushima prefecture by 2045. So when they say get it out of the prefecture, that doesn't mean use it for farmland. Like, they're taking stuff from Los Alamos National Laboratory to the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, not to some farmland somewhere and growing food in it. They're taking it to a geological repository. But what they're Their idea, taken out of the prefecture, is to turn it into. The delegation toured the Nagadoro, which was evacuated for the last 12 years, district in the village of Lydia, which is evacuated for the last 12 years, due to the incredible radioactive fallout, where a pilot project is ongoing in a nuclear wasteland to demonstrate the safety of the soil covered by non-contaminated soil to be used for farming. Well, the roots go down into the earth, right? So they're going to put a layer of fresh soil on top of the radioactive soil and use it for farming. Doesn't make any sense, right? They don't. Why not store it? Why not create a deep geological repository and store that kind of stuff? What is so difficult about that? Well, then they got to manage it for millions of years, Dana. That's the reply. And so, because every 3 or 4 years, who's ever in charge is replaced by somebody else, and then the people that get these positions have to be pretty knowledgeable in the nuclear industry, which means that they're handpicked by the nuclear industry. And the nuclear industry has a lot of credible goblins, and they'll get that job. And then as far as they're concerned, they're like Dr. Jerry Thomas from the Imperial College of London from the United Kingdom that I showed you earlier. Their version is to pretend that it's harmless and then treat it that way so that they can get a big fat paycheck and everybody else be damned. And they will be too. Where a pilot project is ongoing to demonstrate the safety of the soil covered by non-contaminated topsoil to be used for farming. The experts also visited the interim storage facility next to Tokyo Electric Power Company crippled Fukushima No. 1 plant. The facility, this was right alongside, this is 2 kilometers away from ongoing nuclear meltdowns where they got radioactive farms. Now they're going to dump the radioactive soil in the radioactive farms 2 kilometers from the nuclear meltdowns and grow food in it by putting fresh soil on top of it, which is going to be incredibly contaminated within a few days because it's still melting down. The facility, there's no facility. This is Fukushima. This is a nuclear wasteland. It's abandoned. Has accepted the radioactive soil that has been collected through years of decontamination works across the prefectures, is conducting the experiments to see whether the soil can be recycled for road construction. And there they are, the international, I'm better than everybody else on the planet and the millions of species. Now, that's not what Anna Clark officially said, though. Speaks to reporters in the Environment Ministry. So no doubt the facilities projects are bringing added value to volume reduction, recycling of removed soil. The section head, Anna Clark, the section head of the environmental safety sections at the IAEA Corporation, told reporters in Tokyo at the end of the 5-day visit, which marks the nuclear watchdog's first of 3 reviews. And Anna's the mic in her hand, is not a regulator. The IAEA is not, I repeat, not a regulator. And therefore not in a position to judge or approve Japan's soil recycling process. Let's stew on that for a second. The IAEA is not a regulator and not in a position to judge or approve Japan's this, that, or anything else. So what's your purpose? To pretend so nobody else fills in that gap and says, wait a second, this stuff is deadly. You can't put that in people's food. Oh, that's right, that's gone. Woe is me. I still got some tea. That'll get me through. But it is in line with the International Atomic Energy Agency safety standards on disposal of radioactive waste. Is make sure the plan is in line. So they don't have any, they're not a regulator, they're not in a position to judge or approve, but their task is to make sure Japan's plan is in line with the International Atomic Energy Agency safety standards and disposal of radioactive waste, but they're not in a position to judge or approve, and they're not a regulator. But their task is to make sure everything is in line with their standards of disposal of radioactive waste, but they're not a regulator, they're not in a position to judge and or approve. So they have no authority, period, nothing whatsoever. But their task is to make sure Japan's plan is in line with their safety standards. So I can have safety standards and do the same thing, but will I get the same attention, right? No. But they're not a regulator, not in a position to judge or approve Japan's soil recycling process. Does even a little tiny bit of that make sense to anybody? Is there anything about that makes sense? That's the most confusing paragraph I've ever seen. I'm just going to immortalize it on the screen because... So here's the media calling them the authority, but they're not regulators. They're not in positions to judge. They're not in positions to approve nuclear this, that, or anything else. But they're given this false latitude or false pedestal worldwide, and Hollywood and everywhere else, as if they're the arbiters. Not a regulator, and therefore not in a position to judge or approve Japan's soil, water, nuclear, or anything else. They're meant to confuse and disrupt. Says public trust is key to projects. Yeah, but you're not a regulator. You're not in a position to judge or approve. And it never stops, right? Such an amazing statement. A ring of steel all about United Kingdom's $150 million security op guarding King Charles III coronations. Codenamed Operation Golden Orb has increased significantly to become the largest security operation ever. People starving to death all over Britain. They got to throw all this money at the king. The coordination event of King Charles III is supported by submachine guns, no-fly zones, $150 million ring of steel, making it the largest security operation in history of the United Kingdom. $150 million ring of steel to protect them from the terrorists. Due to an increase in security concerns and a number of planned domestic protests. Due to an increase in security and a number of planned domestic protests, thousands of police officers were placed on the streets. No-fly zones, police drones, snipers, armed squadrons. Additionally, entire churn, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear units across London are currently on the streets for the event. 11,500 police officers are been assembled to guard the coordination. Thanks to the huge budget, they are fully equipped and prepared for anything. Well-armed ground patrols watching multiple planned protests. They're doing a little bit more than that. Signs of altercations in the crowd were supported by new waves of technology. So they're using all the latest, greatest gadgets to make you miserable. MI5 is present to focus on subjects of interest, with senior officers utilizing facial recognition to tag potential terrorists and criminal suspects in the thong. So they're hitting everybody with facial recognition. Just disgusting, isn't it? 4 Vulcans 68R fixed-wing aircrafts had their eye in the sky, scanning the area, look for any potential coordination threats. It takes a huge operation just to get the dignitaries into the nation and to their accommodations. Most of them will be transported from the airports under police escorts. Oh, and Queen Camilla. They had 4 of these planes circling around. These are weaponized against the population. Police felt under huge pressure to crack down on protesters. At King's coronation, as more than 50 are arrested. Preemptive arrest of anti-monarchy demonstrators. If you're anti-monarchy, they arrested you so you wouldn't cause a disturbance anywhere. What a stupid country, man. A senior police officer told that the Metropolitan Police have been under huge pressure to arrest anyone who could be considered to be planning to damage the look of the coronation and the UK to the billions watching around the world. This was an event being broadcast across the globe. There's been a very firm instruction not to damage the reputation of the United Kingdom. Whether the rest were morally right is not for the police to judge. What's the point of having police then? How can you ever respect that again? The government's waved through sweeping new powers earlier in the week, allowing police to arrest people randomly. The new legislation also means anyone who blocks roads, airports, and railways could be jailed for up to 12 months. 12 months. Police were granted extended stop and search powers, allowing them to proactively tackle highly disruptive protesters intent on committing an offense. You know, going outdoors during the coronation. The Home Office Police Powers Unit sent out warning letters to anti-monarchists earlier in the week, informing them they would be subject to criminal offenses under law. New changes if they cause disruption. So they'd sent them warnings in advance. What a stupid country. It encouraged protest groups to forward the letter to the members who are likely to be affected by the legislative changes. More than 50 were arrested over suspicion. I don't like the look of you, boy. Officers seized hundreds of Not My King placards that demonstrators had planned to distribute to protesters, with the posters yet to be taken out of their plastic packaging. Video footage was shared online of a City of London police officers warning Republican protesters not to chant "Not My King." You keep your mouth shut, boy. One man was also arrested for carrying a megaphone. Criminal. What a scumbag. How dare you. Which police said could scare the horses. Well, you shouldn't be using them out there. MPs slammed the Met Police crackdowns on protesters during... Mind you, they don't mind the normal protesters to have it. It's only when the coordination is here. The coordination is deeply disturbing, as they argued that a slew of preemptive arrests violated the human rights to protest. Labour MPs said it was deeply disturbing that organisers of Not My King protests in London were arrested that morning and before the protest even began. Whatever you think of the monarchy, the right to peacefully protest is the fundamental to democracy, and it's chilling violation of their rights. There's a big difference between something which the police legitimately considers to be a security or safety issue and merely protesting in the form of placards and T-shirts. Yeah, the new Public Orders Act, which he described as most draconian interference in the right to protest the UK has seen in the last century, has been rushed through because of the coronation. The government has said the timing was coincidental, when obviously that's absurd to suggest. Expected most of the protesters arrested of the day of the coronation to be released without any further actions or charges. So just get them out of the way for the coronation. So he passed a whole bunch of laws to make it illegal. So that's the totalitarian government. When do you draw the line? Well, apparently now you don't, see? Oh, well, we created a law a couple of years ago during the coronation, so we could do what we want. You think they're going to get rid of the law or something now that the coronation's over? Now they got the power to screw you over for the rest of your lives. So I think very few will be charged because I think very few of the people had committed any sort of criminal offense. Yeah, but the laws are still there in the books forever. They arbitrarily just get out and search you now, and the cops will, well, I don't know, the law's been around for a while. I don't know where it came from, but it's the law. It says I can do it, so let's get out and do it. They're effectively being arrested under laws which were brought in specifically to restrict the rights of the public at high-profile events, and that was the only purpose behind it. It's absurd. It's a chicken neck with the big ears could pretend he's special for a few decades. The purpose behind the legislation was not to make it easier for police to deal with the criminal behavior. It was to make it easier for people to be arrested without committing any crimes at all. And the arrests were a warning sign for the future of protests in the United Kingdom. The Met Police Commander Karen Finlay, who scares me just looking at her. We absolutely understand public concern following the arrest we made this morning. No, you don't. That's Metropolitan Police arrest 3 people handing out rape alarms 2 o'clock in the morning over concerns they would disrupt the coordination. So these people goes around when the bars are closing and gives women that are drunk wandering home on their own rape alarms so they can set off the little screamers where you push a button. The council has said it's deeply concerned that reports the 3 nighttime safety volunteers were arrested while handing out rape alarms in Soho the night before the King's coronation. One member of the trio arrested left the police station in tears after the incident. These people they got big jackets, reflectors all over them. They got their identification strapped around their neck. They're part of an organization. They hand them out to women, right? These are rape alarms. Laws were brought in to specifically restrict the rights of the public protest at high-profile events, and that's the only purpose behind it. And it's never going to go away. Makes it easy to arrest people without committing any offense whatsoever. Meanwhile, back in Canada, the lawsuit over Saskatchewan natural gas power plants is misguided. So the nuclear industry is suing everybody, gas, oil, and coal, and then calling nuclear green. This says nuclear will replace it. Oh, the small modular reactors will replace it. So there's enough people stupid enough bought into it to wreck everybody else's future. That's how they do it. They turn you against yourselves, right? A lawsuit by an environmental group in Canada against Saskatchewan Power to try and stop natural gas plants. Climate Justice Saskatoon. Climate Justice. Saskatoon, Canada is where a lot of the uranium for the world comes from. It's a real pro-nuclear province here in Canada. and the nuclear industry has infiltrated it heavily for the last number of decades. Claims power generated by fossil fuel violates people's rights to life, liberty, and security of the person that are guaranteed in the charter. If I had enough funding, we'd be suing nuclear plants, small modular reactor makers, doing the same thing to them. So they're just trying to get rid of everything but nuclear. Universe today. Newborn stars surrounded by planet-forming disk at different angles. It's 200 light years away from Earth. So why do we got scientists wasting absurd resources and precious materials and time and energy on this shit when they can be put to work on Fukushima or Hanford or Oxford or Santa Susana or pressing geothermal solutions and stuff like that? Right, so you take all this brain power and you waste it away for decades, looking at something that humanity will never know, don't need to know about. That's not good to us until we solve our own problems, is what I'm saying to you. Yeah, it's wonderful, wild stuff, but it's irrelevant. We got real problems on the planet, and we got tons of talent, but they're all being directed away. And a lot of it gets wasted and used against us by joining into the military-industrial complexes, which is what United Nations is, a military-industrial complex. Astronomers, 4.5 billion years ago. Yeah, but look, your children don't have a future because you're wasting all those excellent skills on something that is not necessary in this incredible troubling times. European Space Agency has set itself the ambitious goal of building a nuclear engine that could enable humanity to go further into space than ever before. Males can only travel for about 2 years, live 2 years in space, and then they go blind. Females don't have that problem, by the way. So unless we're going to send a team of female space travelers with nothing to gain from it, we take all this energy and effort, all these precious metal and resources, and you throw it into the space with no. See, the way I see the world, or the way I understand this world, I should say, is we can solve a lot of our problems. We just got to go ahead and solve them. We got the resources, we got the manpower. And so, if we took, say, 1,500 universities, yeah, and each day for 1 hour, those 1,500 universities are going to crack a code of, say, how to dig deep enough to tap in geothermal anywhere. So every day for 1 hour, every university will contribute to the same pile this information, so nobody's being redundant or nobody's double doing the work not necessary. We would solve that pretty quick. 10 or 15 minutes later, we'd solve it. See? If we took 1,500 universities and for 1 hour a day and come up with a solution for nuclear waste, we would have come up with that solution a long time ago. We don't need to do that because it's not that hard of a problem. We can solve this. But because we have the ability to do that, we could have. We should have. If we had, we talk about this over the years a lot. If we had meteorites coming at Earth, right? We would take all the universities on the planet to come up with solutions to deal with it if that's what was necessary. We wouldn't hesitate, would we? And everybody else would join in too. And you know what? We would probably come up with a solution. Like the military-industrial complex, the war machine, the weapons producer, have got the whole planet wrecked. They only care about, they can't make profits in the stock exchange for the weapons manufacturers without using the weapons. Right? And so, like, weapons manufacturers should never be in the stock exchange, for starters. Nuclear power plants shouldn't be in stock exchanges because there's no incentive, and they're not binded by the normal moral codes a typical business charters would have, right? They're like, so Facebook, you can't put Facebook in jail. You can't put Mark Zuckerberg in jail because he doesn't really own it per se anymore. It's owned by the shareholders. So there's no incentive for them not to be evil because you can't put them in jail. All you can do is give them a fine. They don't care about a fine because they're a corporate personhood, so they're going to put all their tax money in offshore accounts rather than paying state, federal, local, whatever taxes. They don't pay any taxes. That goes into offshore accounts because they're a worldwide corporation. They got what's known as corporate personhood, which is a legal amendment to the slavery law that gave corporations certain facets of human rights. So there's no incentive not to do nasty, horrible, evil stuff because nobody can go to jail. All he can do is, at best, under the worst case scenario, they'll get a fine. They'll pay that with the taxes that they should have paid. Instead of paying, they threw it in an offshore bank account to pay any fines that might come up for all the criminal activities. And they can do crimes in all these countries. And if a country catches them, they'll pay a fine in that country, but they'll still commit the crimes in the other countries. There's no incentive not to be evil. And now it's ran its course, particularly when it comes to the weapons manufacturers. And so, like, the Pentagon had made an incredible statement a number of years ago that they had 29,000 public relation employees, officers as they call them. So they had 29,000 public relation officers. So how many people can they contact each day? Yeah, your boss gets a phone call. This is the Pentagon. We didn't like the story you ran. Can you retract this, and that? Oh, by the way, we're going to make a donation. A generous one. How hard is it to influence the medias? And then you take a lot of these people that in the weapons facility, who's the opposition is the investigative journalist, right? So let's buy up all the media because there's not really that many of them on the planet. Let's buy it all up. So Rupert Murdoch bought over when he first hit 600 medias, he had done an interview and he was talking about how his empire would never die. Even after he died, his empire would live forever doing the exact same thing, which was deceit and dishonesty and deception, right? And so he said, it's pretty interesting. He said, because I can have 600 media in 10 minutes with the same pictures, the same paragraphs, by the same authors in 600 newspapers worldwide. And he said, how influential do you think I actually am? He said, I can make and break a politician overnight. I can ruin an actor or a celebrity overnight. And he said, the money I'm going to make from those salacious stories could pay any lawsuit they can possibly win down the road and pay for all the lawyers the whole time. So he said, I can't lose. I can't lose. All I can do is win, whatever it is that I want to win. And it's not going to be good. So then when you got just a group of people with that influence that owns most of the media worldwide, You got the entire planet hoodwinked. It's a very, 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 very disappointing when you look at the future. How are you going to have a future with this kind of dysfunction? God save us all. Britain is about to get the king it deserves. This is a Canadian story. From Canada, the coronation is especially absurd. Say it out loud. Try not to snicker. The coronation of Charles III. Polls gauging the public mood around Charles' ascension found that only 15% of the British population were very interested in the coronation. For Canada, the absurdity of the coronation is basic. We're not a British colony, but we are. We have the Queen's face on our money, the politicians, the governments, the police, the legal justice system. All of it swears allegiance to the King and their ascensions, their children first, and Canadians second. You have to do that to work in the government or the military in Canada. This week on his fancy carriage ride, Charles will be surrounded by preposterous objects. He'll be holding the world's largest diamond on the end of a stick. He'll be wearing a hat with a ruby that Henry V wore into battle. He'll be sitting on a chair over the Stone of Destiny, a stone England's king stole from the Scots over 700 years ago. That's too much for me. The real absurdity will be the deeper. For both Canada and Britain, Charles is a symbol of twin identity crisis. The man represents us, but it's hard to think of anyone less representative. It's all fun and games, but his face is going to be printed on my money and your money. This was a painting commissioned. They have two guards decked out in some kind of weird, stupid costumes. Once unveiled, the portrait is really rather good. As someone who can spend several weeks for the purpose of this piece looking at everything you can put Charles' face on: tea towels, biscuit tins, trays, Christmas tree ornaments, mugs. Takes real skill and care not to make him look like a cartoon. He lacks his mother's immense entitlement, which is really true, right? There was Prince Philip. He wrote a book saying that when he dies, he wanted to come back as a virus and wipe out humanity. To your right stood up there. And there's the Queen herself. Man, she was mad. And the red tunics are Canadian RCMP police tunics. How much more Britain are we? And they got all the costumes of the natives that they conquered on the streets, of children, of course. How bizarre is that? Like, really, how bizarre is that? Look at these children in native costumes. They've done nothing but destroy the natives their entire existence on top of that. And you got the little inbreeds. And look at all the zombies. You know what's missing? Everybody's not holding up a phone because it's such an old picture, right? You imagine what that picture would look like today. Everybody would be holding up their phone. Of course, the police would call the phone a weapon. Or they could throw it at the royalty. Once the portrait is unveiled, 3 cheers erupted. Long live the king. King Charles III, the coronation, the 6th of May, 2023. I cannot help but think of my mother in 1953, besides another muddy river, the Pentecodiac. My Canadian mother grew up in Lower Coverdale, New Brunswick, and that year my grandmother drove her to 7 miles to nearby Moncton to see the film of the Queen's coronation. So all the theaters were showing the films of the Queen's coronation. Everybody was literally goaded to go there. If you didn't go there, you were an outcast in your community. It was the only film she saw her entire childhood, 1953. And the only film she saw before going to university. That's how much the royal family mattered here in Canada. Think about that statement. Every kid was required in school to watch it. My great-uncle Driver Lehman died in France fighting for the British Empire. When Driver died, a local newspaper reported a letter he wrote to his mother. After he was discharged from hospital in 1915, he was considered unfit for service and could have come home, but he wrote her and told her that his place was there. He said he was not only fighting for his king and country, but for his home and his mother, which is a revolutionary thing back then to have a thought. That's who I come from, cannon fodder for the British Empire, and a lot of men who died for a lot of British kings. And so they can be filthy wealthy and control your life way into the futures, generation after generation. That's where I come from, cannon fodder from the British Empire. Meghan Markle used to live a couple of blocks from me in Toronto, and when the prince would show up, black servants would block off the sidewalks. She owns the right to all the uranium worldwide, if I remember correctly. Queen Elizabeth did. Her story is a fairy tale, all right. A young woman falls in love with a prince and ends up in a chamber of horrors. The lack of enthusiasm for Charles has an obvious source. There is no enthusiasm for anything. He says the nation is demoralized. Canada. And there's our degenerate, despicable inbreed Trudeau, the Prime Minister. What a disgusting piece of creature he turned out to be. I had to look around in the background, though, to see what I could see, right? I don't know what I'm looking at, so it don't really matter. At home, for the foreseeable future, every time I look at a coin or a bill, I'll think, we're the possession of that guy. Because you see him on your money all the time whenever you take it out. Canada's the only country in the world that I know that knows how to live without an identity. We'll get through this. And every time a Canadian sees Charles on the currency, they'll know our country makes no sense and we have no plan to change it. Say it out loud and try not to snicker. The coronation of Charles III. There will be a fly past by RAF when Charles is on the balcony. How are you celebrating the coronation? You'll be having a street party? Are you going to be watching at home on TV or visiting London or watching outside on a big screen or listening to it on the radio? How will you do it? How will you celebrate the coronation? So how the hell do we ever get to this point? How do we even survive this long, I wonder? King Charles mingles with the slaves known as world leaders, the useful puppets. Charles seen for the first time in coronation as he and Camilla arrive at the Buckingham Palace. So this must have been a breach of protocol because a sniper could definitely pop that. Or am I wrong? So it'll be followed by an appearance by the royals on their Buckingham Palace balcony. There will be a fly past by the RAF at 2:30 p.m. So that's a really interesting statement because when I was young, you would see these Walt Disney productions where the prince, the king's son, would be on the balcony talking to his loyal subjects, I think it was they used to call them back then, right? And he would say, me and my wealthy loved ones really appreciate your slave labor, and we want to throw you a loaf of bread each to make your day better. right? You see these ridiculous where they would get out and, but that in real life that never happens. That's just Walt Disney, it's an incredible fable. There's so many books and cartoons like that now were the same thing, right? And so I started looking for the most iconic Disney princes. And this one right here, I was like, wait a second, I know that guy. That's their current prime minister. That's so bizarre, isn't it? Anyway, thank goodness we're past that a lot. Despite $1 trillion spending for 100% renewable energy, it's yet to be proven on a citywide scale. Last year in Canada, in Ottawa, Ontario rather, the Ford administration up there closed 750 wind farms and solar farms, and there was $4.3 billion allocated for storage for the renewables so they could prove a concept, right? Because they've been scuttling that worldwide storage for renewables because then all of a sudden you don't need nuclear, gas, oil, or coal anymore. But really you should only be using geothermal, right? Between 2020 and 2022, the world's nations spent $1.2 trillion on transition to wind and solar and other renewable energy generations. With deadline goals for 100% renewables, nobody yet has proven that's attainable. Now, there was some striking things that happened. Last year was 291 gigawatts, or 2021, was 290 gigawatts of energy came online, renewable, rather. That's equal to 333 large nuclear power plants in 12 months coming online, but not with storage. Not with storage. Whenever they show you the wind farms, right, there's never no wind blowing on the ocean. It's always flat calm. It's very rarely flat calm on an ocean, by the way. No one can point to a success story in which a population of at least 10,000 successfully ran its grid entirely on wind and solar every day for a full year. It's 100% true. That's true. I'm not arguing with that. Because they scuttled storage. There's around 20 storage solutions available. So it's pretty dishonest for them to approach it that way. That's quite the weasel thing to do. That's okay, though, because we're used to it, right? That's normal. We are talking about the crazy world of nuclear. I'll give you an example, though. Because it's dishonest for them to say what they're saying there. That's really dishonest. To suggest that there's no solutions. I disrespect them for doing it too, by the way. Well, first you can have pumped hydro, which should be the sake of water batteries where you have two artificial reservoirs. And what they discovered was they can do it 100% renewable electricity. This was just a couple of years ago. They identified 500,000 places, natural places worldwide. But generally, you pump water up a hill with excess energy. And it comes downhill after, right? And of course, in Canada, the $4.3 billion allocated for that were given to Bruce Nuclear Power to make storage. But they wouldn't give it to the renewable industry to make storage. How come I can't find the other piece? Hang on here. Woe is me, eh? Here we go. And And compressed air storage was another. These are just a couple of the 20 or so that's out there that are reasonable, that are scaled. So this was $54 million for a startup pump from compressed air wind storage. And so they wanted to build windmills that done only one thing and was compressed air down into mine shafts. So you stored an absurd amount of energy. So it's not like pumping water, it's just compressing air. And then you release the air to turn the turbines when you needed the extra energy. And so the idea was every fifth or 10th one of the windmills would be compressing air. So that would be its job, is to compress air, right? So instead of a windmill driving a generator to pump that pumps compressed air, the windmill itself would produce the pump compressed air, which was a brilliant idea. So they spent $1 trillion and they built an absurd amount of energy, but the only key was missing was storage. And they always claim the same thing, that there's no storage, and therefore you need nuclear. Geothermal for hospitals, where you can just dig these holes that are, I can't remember, what is it, like 16 inches or something? Anywhere you want to. And then you use that to heat up and cool the hospitals, for instance, right? Geothermal energy can provide half the world's energy, Quatsi energy. That Quatsi was saying there was enough energy under your feet. It was 1 billion times more than we currently use worldwide, is right under our feet. It's, is it a lake or a battery, a new kind of hydropower? This is pumped hydro, where you have two reservoirs, you pump water up to the top one, so you can build them anywhere. Not a new idea, but it's undergoing a renaissance in countries where wind and solar are also growing. But like again, you can have both of them. You can have pumped hydro and compressed air storage. Nuclear power generation renaissance underway, which is simply not true. There's 4 gigawatts for the United States, which is literally irrelevant in the scale of energy, and less than 1 in Canada. There is no nuclear renaissance. 413 nuclear reactors in 32 countries currently produce almost 10% of the world's electricity. But the reason they're getting almost 10% is because they're running all of them at breakneck speeds. And a lot of them now are very old, very brittle. These are very pressurized reactors at over 1,000 psi. And so any kind of catalyst with this brittle containment, you can have a detonation and have to evacuate that part of your country. These small modular nuclear reactors that are starting to come online, there is no small modular reactors starting to come online or being built. You got to build some to start to come online at some point. It's completely dishonest. And we see this constantly, this dishonesty. Hey, we got a poll for everybody tonight. Did Russia, now we covered this at the beginning, it's a pretty convoluted story as it is. Did Russia use a nuclear weapon during NATO's proxy war in Ukraine, or could it be a staged false flag? Most likely they used a small nuclear suitcase like bomb, which was a great comment. Because, I mean, we've all heard that connotation before when you think about it, right? They're starting to come online. They're not coming online, though. Learning about nuclear reduces the fear, says a reader. So Bruce. That's a pretty low life story. So Bruce is a Canadian nuclear waste management. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization is planning on putting a deep geological repository, allegedly, in South Bruce. But the problem with it is they need the consent of the population, they say. They can't put it there without the consent. So we're going to give a bunch of people money and the other people nothing. Then we're going to have a referendum. I wonder how that's going to turn out. Like it did the last couple of times where they said no. Many people are unreasonably severe fear of radiation. No, it's appropriate fear of radiation. It's reasonable fear of radiation. But they're framing that unreasonably severe fear. Recent study from the World Nuclear Association, which lied constantly, we cover it all the time, shows that most people greatly overestimate the risk of nuclear disease factories known as nuclear power plants. Many common activities like riding in a car, engaging in sports, working on a farm, scratching your back, statistically risky. But we don't consider them so. Nuclear power is statistically extremely safe, but people think it's very risky. So most common activities like riding in cars, engaging in sports, working on a farm, yeah, these are, you can get hurt. You're walking your doggy, crossing the road. But we do it, right? Well, the problem with this is it's indiscriminate. Nothing has a immune trigger to defend against anthropogenic man-made radiation. When it enters your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. So you have less oxygen in your body for the rest of your life because you're displacing red blood cells and carrying nutrition and oxygen, right? Most people are greatly overestimating the risk of nuclear power and many common activities like riding in a car. The problem is I could be driving past a nuclear power plant on vacation 200 miles away, 2,000 miles away. I'm driving along, nuclear power does a bit of venting, and they're always venting. They're legally allowed to do it, even though there was never a debate or a referendum or any kind of engagement with the communities. They're legally allowed to vent this much whenever you feel like it. And some cases called burping, right? So I roll my car window down and I'm breathing, and this radiation goes in my lungs, and I'm driving down the road at 100 kilometers an hour, and I'm on vacation now. I head back home, and I'm thousands of miles away from this reactor. And 20 years down the road, I got heart problems, or liver problems, or lung problems, or respiratory, or pituitary, or thyroid, or adrenaline, or Alzheimer's, or dementia, or autism, or diabetes, or Down syndrome. Or my children got incredible congenital malformations, or who knows what. Because it's in my body's attacking it for the rest of my life. Now imagine if I lived there or worked there, or I'm eating food from the farms around because they're always vented. The fuel pools are always hemorrhaging into the environment. So this is completely different from an automobile because you drive to point A, you wear a seatbelt, you got airbags, you got all kinds of protection devices. If you're careful and cautious, you're probably going to be okay for the most part. We accept that as a risk, right? Because, shops are built so far away, we need transportation. They concluded that even in this nightmare scenario, the Chernobyl form, a group of United Nations, again, we talked about United Nations earlier, where they're not regulatory, they don't have authority, they don't have influence. It's artificially inflated, right? That even in this nightmare scenario, casualties were compared to life, less than 50 deaths from radiation. Now, Chernobyl, I showed you at the very beginning for probably 15 minutes on Chernobyl. All kinds of studies. It closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom. So it's pretty dishonest. In fact, it's ridiculously dishonest for them to suggest that there was only 50 people. All 600 helicopter pilots died at Chernobyl, by the way. Most people perceive it to have been much more devastating, and this false public perception has contributed to the shutting down of well-functioning nuclear disease factories worldwide. Well, this is not a false public perception. This is backed up by hard data that I provided many, many times, including tonight, at the beginning of the show, for starters. Academic studies. By comparison, the collapse of China's power dam in 75, estimated to kill between 12,000 and 240,000 people. That's quite the discrepancy, by the way. Yet most of us consider hydroelectric power to be very safe. Well, like there's been many hydropower accidents over the years. Nobody denying that. But like, let me put. I got a better way of putting it. I think. Hang on. There we go. I got it this time, baby. I think I got it. I think I got it. I think I do. I think I do. Here we go. I'm not sure which one I grabbed. So this is Fukushima radioactive fallout based on about 20 days. So everybody that breathes it ultimately has some kind of response because your body attacks it. All the animals, all the birds, all the insects, all the humans, all the creatures have no autoimmune trigger to defend against the radiation. This model covers the entire planet in 20 days, and this is based on 32 days. 32 days later. So all the species, all the insects, all the birds start getting full body x-rays, start getting sterilized, stop reproducing, breaks up the food chain. So radiation is not harmless and innocuous and benign. It's lethal, deadly, and it's permanent. It never goes away. So I disrespect him for suggesting that it has no adverse side effects. There's no debate that the spent fuel from Canadian nuclear reactors is toxic, which, first off, everything that's in the pools is still splitting atoms into the environment, creating these plumes. By the way, that plume is based on venting, not the actual nuclear meltdowns. That should make you feel all nice and warm inside. And think about the deceit and dishonesty of media, where they're pretending they're in a reactor building that don't even exist. So there's no debate spent fuel from Canadian reactors is toxic. There's broad consensus from the industry, though, from the lying betrayal of the industry, that encapsulating it and sealing in the Earth's crust is a way to keep it safely isolated in perpetuity. I'm not disagreeing with that, but you don't need to put it in the back gardens because everything is vented for starters. Everything's vented on the highway there. Everything's vented and repackaged when it gets there. Again, in Canada, they bought 1,600 acres of prime farmland. Yet they don't even know if it's geologically stable where they want to put it under the farmland. But they bought the farmland because that's the prime spot. Do you get what they're up to? And they want the farms to keep working the whole time because everything is vented. For those interested, especially the neighbors in the South Bruce, I highly recommend a recent video from Decoupled Media. How I learned to stop worrying and love nuclear waste. That's a pun on an old video. Well, here's another video you might want to watch. You see, you got Seth Dorn. There's many media besides these people from CBS and PBS. You got BBC Rupert Winfield Hayes. You got CNN Ann Curran. You got ABC Cecilia Vega. All of these people are pretending they're in a fuel pool at the top of a building to your left that no longer exists. Cecilia Vega is currently a White House press agent. She's an Emmy award-winning journalist, but she pretended she's in a building that don't exist. She just joined the CBS News Magazine 2023. But she pretended she was in a building that no longer exists. After 12 years at ABC, where she pretended, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, that she's in the fuel pool on top of the building to the left that no longer exists. But she looks like a normal, everyday person. But she pretended that she's in a building, a nuclear meltdown that no longer exists. She's chief White House correspondent. She exchanges with presidents and members of the administration regularly made headlines, but she pretended she was in a building that no longer exists. She served as senior White House correspondent, but she's pretending that she even looks like a normal, everyday human. If you met her with some friends, you would think she's a nice person, but she's not. She's actually an evil witch who pretended she's in a building that don't even exist. And that caused the deaths. Because of that deception, she'll end up killing millions and millions of people by perpetrating that kind of deception. During those 4 years, she reports on historical moments and Supreme Court appointments, presidential impeachments, to the firing FBI Director James Comey and a Mueller report. Yet she, who looks like a normal everyday person, is actually a real-life demonic sadistic demon pretending she's in the fuel pool to your left of a building that no longer exists. But you'll meet her and you'll see her and you think she's a wonderful soul. She seems like a really nice person, but she's not, is she? In addition to her political coverage, she reported on the Fukushima nuclear disaster, took her inside the power plant twice. There's one of them right there in the bottom right-hand corner where she's pretending she's on top of the fuel pool to your left that no longer even exists. And she pretended she was in there twice. But yet, when you look at her, she seems like a normal, everyday person. Pope Francis, from the submarines at the bottom of the Arctic Sea and the floodwaters of Hurricane Katrina, seems like a really nice person. Seems like a really great person, but she's not. She's an absolute sadistic, demonic, hateful scumbag. But she looks like a real pretty girl. Seems like a real nice person, but she's not, folks. She's really, really not. Did Russia use a nuclear weapon during NATO's proxy war in Ukraine? Or could it have been a staged false flag? And so a false flag could be where NATO blew it up with a small nuclear weapon and so they can blame it on Russia to start a nuclear war. That was Operation Mockingbird, was it? Per capita, the safest and cleanest energy source. Like, he seems like a really nice, normal, everyday person, but he's not. He's like Vega, he's not. His job is to sell you the biggest, dangerous lie. So he can get a paycheck, you can get sick and die. As long as he got his paycheck, that's all that really fucking mattered. Fueling began at the first refurbished Bruce unit, which is a Canadian disease factory here in a nuclear power plant in Canada. We call them disease factories because they're surrounded by farms and they're hemorrhaging radiation. They're refurbished. So when Fukushima melted down, they grabbed $26 billion for the reactors in Ontario to refurbish them so that the disease factories can last a lot longer, murder everybody everywhere. Wind and solar are not nearly enough. Well, this is the same excuse we've heard over and over and over. Well, there's got no storage, so it can't work. Have a nice day. That's what we want. Gotta get nuclear. Again, your future is scuttled because that's what they're doing. They're scuttling. They're wrecking your future. They're wrecking your ability to have a future. Wind and solar are certainly enough if you paired it with, but you should be using geothermal, right? Be wary of lifted moratorium in new Illinois nuclear plants. In fact, they want to change the law. I was covering reading another story today. They want to change the law to call nuclear renewable. So that way they get rid of everything but nuclear. Rolls-Royce small modular nuclear project could have to fight Bill Gates. First off, Rolls-Royce got $1 billion. They're not putting a nickel of their own money into it. Second off, their so-called small modular reactors are half a gigawatt. So they're 500 megawatts. These are not small. These are they're small, large nuclear power plants, but they're not small. We need the end the war on nuclear power. No, we need to end war and nuclear power. We need to end the war on nuclear power. These kind of headlines, a lot of what you've seen from these people that I showed tonight, is clearly the industry is posturing, and clearly is panicking. There really isn't, I must be missing something, because when they claim, this connotation is implying there's a war on nuclear power, I don't see it. In some ways I might see it, but the war for nuclear power is right here. You're watching it. That's the war on nuclear power. It's a one-man war with a group of people, a small, very tiny group of people. And if you're watching this broadcast, you're hardcore, man. You were hardcore. You woke up. You got hurt and woke up, and you said, "Holy shit, nuclear!" And you got that nuclear bug into you that says, "This is bad shit. My goodness, how'd they ever get away with this for so long?" Well, they had a lot of help, right? You can imagine when you can get all the medias worldwide to pretend you're on a building that don't exist. You got the upper hand, right? I got to come out and just challenge the narrative, because we got nobody else. There is no war on nuclear power. If there is, we're it. You are looking at the war on nuclear power. And I apologize for being so pathetic. And so they go through this whole bunch of nonsense. Oh, to put it into perspective, eating 10 bananas, dirty bastards to say that, or 2 Brazilian nuts results in the same radiation dose as living next to a nuclear power plant for a year. I can't believe somebody said that. It's been a while, right, since we heard anybody stoop to that low. Excuse me. The nuclear industry is responsible for a very small part of radiation exposure to the public. To put it into perspective, it's like eating 10 bananas. Or eating 2 Brazilian nuts. Eating 2 little Brazilian nuts results in the same radiation dose as living nearby a nuclear power plant for a year. And you know what's sad about this? Is I just skipped ahead 1, 2, 3, 15. I had to skip ahead 20 of these pages just to show you that one, because that's the end of the show, right? But I had to. We're gonna have to cover that one on the next show. We're pretty good, actually. We're almost through everything. I should keep going, but I'm not going to. That's how you get exhausted, when you run yourself into the ground. Because we took yesterday off after Sunday's show, because Sunday show they're really hard shows when we talk about the die-offs. There's so many things in them. You got to ignore it, and you can't make a mistake, or the industry clicks it out and says, "See, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Look at this." But forget about the other 3 hours. But here's this one where he made a Freudian slip. So I have always got to be careful I don't even make a Freudian slip when I'm doing the show, because they chop them out, and a year down the road they string them all together the little Freudian slips. It says, look, he don't know nothing. They don't show you the 8,000 hours that goes into that year. I put a lot more than 8,000 hours a year into it, I'll show you that. Well, that's a lie. I can't, there's only 7,500 hours in a year, I forget. That's sad when I don't even know how many hours are in a year. I find, that's proof I got Alzheimer's. I don't know how many hours are in a year. Dana's finally lost it. He doesn't know how many hours in a year. It's only a matter of time now. There's 8,760 hours in a year. So I'm probably pushing at least 5,000 hours a year. And I'm at it more than that. There's no, that's it, like when I'm not sleeping is the only time I'm not at it. And a lot of times I'm listening to lectures when I'm sleeping to go to sleep. And when I wake up, I might even just lie there and listen to a lecture. And it is what it is. How do we do on the poll tonight? We're gonna let's get off the big screen, get back into the little screen. Find some music first. Where's the music? Music. We'll pick up here tomorrow night. We got to go hard tomorrow night, hard Wednesday night, hard Thursday night, just to catch up to what the pile is I got there right now. We got 4 shows I'm probably never going to get to, which is not acceptable. On top of that, okay, what did I need to do here? We're going to do the poll. Let's bring the poll up. Did the Ruskies use a nuclear weapon during NATO's proxy war in Ukraine? Or could it be a staged false flag? So I'm could be just a munition factory blew up, but I can't see that. I can't go that route because to me, personally, I don't know about anybody else, since everybody's entitled to their own opinion. In my opinion, because I got a lot of experience too, but my opinion is that was a small nuclear bomb. Because that makes sense. When you look at the detonation, because there was 2 of them, quite a distance from each other. Now the official story is a Russian drone, kamikaze drone, set off these munitions, right? But from my experience, I've never seen a munition factory. When a munition factory goes off, there's all these different munitions in different areas, not like it's all in one great big pile, right? They're throwing all their weapons on this great big pile, like a pile of firewood or something. This is all over the place. So the detonation has to be multiple detonations, right? Like fireworks. If you had a whole bunch of fireworks on timers, and there's all these different fireworks going off, and then you would expect to see large chunks of the building too, right? So my take on it, because of certain things like that, is this was a small nuclear weapon that they detonated, and they done 2 of them. And we happen to have that on video. We showed it tonight. So we're going to end the poll. 44 votes. And we expect divides because I gave you 2. So this wasn't about a poll per se, as it was about having that conversation. Like a lot of my polls are not really polls. They're about invoking this ideology for an hour or 2 so the population gets thoroughly indoctrinated into facts. Right? Because a lot of stuff we might only cover for a few seconds, make a great point, but then that goes on for 2 hours, right? Okay, well, let's close that down. Just turn the music back up if I can find it. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Yeah, we're under a nuclear banana republic. Well said. Night, everybody. Kevin Blanche was here tonight. Thanks, Dana Nasana, for moderating again tonight. Even he doesn't have to do it because I think the nuclear industry, remember how vicious they were for years, but they couldn't get rid of me, right? I wouldn't go away, and because I'm honest, I shouldn't go away. I'm not supposed to go away. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. We'll pick up with the bananas tomorrow night. It always makes for fun times. Have a great night. See everybody tomorrow. Oh, thanks, Dana. Yeah, good night all. Take care.